And welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the channel, and more importantly, a good day to all. And as you can see, we're back inside the cab of our 2012 1500, in which the last modification we've made a couple of videos on is installing this Linkswell IQ Android head unit. And in both of those videos, we talked about adding the steering wheel controls to this vehicle, because as you can see here, you can kind of just barely see the outline or the indentation of where those buttons would normally be, but however, on this trim level, it did not come with it. But what you can see here on the seat is a pile of parts, and I'll put links in the description to all these. But this is going to be a new wiring harness, which will allow us to connect up our existing buttons, but also add in these two part numbers you see here. There's one there, of course the other one here, and these will be the buttons that will go on the sides of the steering wheel. And it gives us basically 6 button functions, 3 per side, because you've got a center button on each one of these and then an up and a down on each one. And what you see here, let me give you that part number. This is a Mopar part number. This is a new steering wheel bolt. Now, per the manual, you're supposed to replace this anytime you remove and put that back in. Last time we were in here, we didn't do that. But since we're going to be taking that bolt back out again, rather than beat on it a second time to get that steering wheel back on, we're just going to go ahead and take this opportunity to put a fresh bolt in there. And then what you can see here, obviously, is another part of the steering wheel trim. And this one will go behind the steering wheel. But the big difference here is that we've got the provisions to put our new buttons in. Now, interesting note on this, and I'll show you this part number here. This part number comes up as a part number that covers like a 2013 to like 2022 Ram, I believe. Now, what you're going to think is that this one's a 2012, but I took this and put it on the steering wheel that came out of this truck so we could put the aftermarket one on, and this fit just fine. Now, interesting enough, if you look at the way they've got the steering wheel laid out in this 2012, this is actually kind of a look that you see on the 2013s on up, because we've got a cruise control here on this side. Normally, kind of what happens on the 09 to 12s is that you end up with the cruise control kind of down here on an extra little stick, and then these buttons are considerably different for the forward, back, and up, down, and so on and so forth. But what you can see here is that obviously we've got cruise control on this side and button on this side. And if you've watched any of our video in our 2500 series, you'll notice even though it's a 2016, it's got the exact same steering wheel with the same button layout. So what I think is happening here, and I'll have to check the manufacture date to be sure, is that since this is the 2012 and this is kind of a 2013-ish looking steering wheel, chances are this truck came out late enough in 2012 it actually adopted some 2013 parts, in this case the steering wheel being one. And it's not uncommon. It happens from time to time with manufacturers, especially as one model year is phasing out and they're bringing in the parts to start producing the new model year, but for that period of time they kind of have both on the assembly line, if that makes sense. And our Hellcat is no exception. On our Hellcat, even though it's a 2019, it actually has parts on it from a 2020. It actually has the cold air intake from a Hellcat Red Eye, even though it's a standard Hellcat. It came that way from the factory, which is interesting enough. So what we're going to do is look at getting this new back piece of trim on, get our buttons installed. And now we may have to do some additional programming with Alpha OBD in order to enable these additional buttons, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But for now, what we're going to do is, as you saw me do before when we put this steering wheel in, we're just going to take loose the two mounting screws here, one on this side and another one on this side, and I believe they are either Torx T15s or T20s. I'll confirm with you when I bring you back. But we're going to pop this top cover off in order to start spinning our steering wheel around to get our clip tool in here to pop our airbag out. Then once we get the airbag loose enough where we can get it out, then we'll disconnect the battery for safety measures and then get the airbag disconnected. But for now, what I'm going to do is just take off again these two front screws here and then pop this top cover of this steering wheel column out of here. And that should, this boot for the shifter should release itself when we get this top cover out. But let me work on that and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our top cover off and we got our steering airbag kind of clip tool. And this one's put out by Outlaw. I'll have a link in the description below. But what we're looking at doing is that we've got, kind of see where I'm pointing with my finger. Let me get you some light. There we go. Now right here on this side, right through there, one on the opposite side, and then we got one down there in the middle, and there's like 3 little hoops that catch this airbag in place. And what we're looking at doing is getting inside with this tool and kind of bending up on those hooks until they release, and the airbag will kind of pop off. Each loop will kind of pop out of place when you get it loose. Now the issue is the bottom one, obviously you have to be able to start the vehicle and rotate it. So usually what I like to do is start the vehicle, rotate it, get the bottom one popped out of place, and then use, I don't know, something like this cardboard box, something along that nature, just to kind of hold the bottom one popped out while you start the truck, rotate the steering wheel back around so you can get the 2 upper ones undone, and then you can disconnect your battery at that time. So it's kind of hard to get in here and show you this with an inspection mirror. So I'm just going to get in here and kind of work on, so you don't have to start the truck to necessarily get the top ones out. You can see you've got a nice, usually have enough slop in there, you can kind of move that around. But that bottom one, even if you take this bottom piece of trim off, you just don't have the clearance to get into the bottom of this. It's easier to rotate the steering wheel around to get to it. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on. I'm going to get this bottom one popped out of here, rotate it around, then I'll disconnect the battery and bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got our bottom of our airbag freed up with our tool, rotated the steering wheel back around, and we got our battery disconnected. Now, like I was talking about earlier, we do have a just a light piece of cardboard, just something to put in there just to keep that bottom snap from pushing back forward and snapping back in place. And maybe I can kind of show you here. Let's see if I can do this. I'm just going to rotate the steering wheel so I can get a better bite. Yep, that's it. That got that in. You can see we got that popped. So just, and you'll feel it when you're inside this channel back here and you kind of push forward, and obviously, you know, we can see we got that in pop free. So now I got to work on the other corner. So let me work on this other corner and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got our airbag loose, got our clips released. All we have to do for those airbag connectors, and remember we do have the battery disconnected at this point in time, is that these will just squeeze, mind my fingers, getting in the shot. These tabs will squeeze here on the sides and we can get these connectors out. Now so far every one of these I've ever dealt with have always been color coded, and this is no exception on these. We've got a yellow connector and a black connector, and they'll go back into those same spots. See if I can get you a little bit more off to the side here. Now, we also have a Christmas tree clip that holds the wiring harness down on the top. There we we go. So we got our airbag wiring disconnected. Now we just have to contend, sorry for putting you upside down, for that Christmas tree clip that's kind of right there in the center. You see that wire coming out of that. So let me get that Christmas tree clip undone and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got our airbag disconnected and out of here, just like when we replaced this steering wheel. All I'm going to do now is just to use the impact driver to break that bolt loose again in the center. And then what we can do next, and you see me use this before, but I'll bring you back and show you again, but we'll get our steering wheel puller on here, which hooks into these square holes here, and we'll push against this nut. We'll thread it back in a little bit, and that'll help back this off. Now remember, we're going to disconnect this wiring harness up here first at the top of our clock spring. There we go. That's now out. That's perfect. What I want to do is compare that with our new wiring harness. Yep, it definitely looks like we've got the same connector, same number of wires. All right, perfect. Okay, now remember, and we'll do this when we do it, but as we pull this steering wheel off, remember your airbag wiring here is sitting right here on this clock spring, and we just want to make sure that we don't grab it with the steering wheel and inadvertently pull against it and damage it in any way. But let me do that. Let me get this bolt broke free and get the puller set up on here, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our center bolt broken free. We did thread it back in a little bit just to have something to push against. And I showed you this before, but I'll show you this one again. This is an OEM Tools steering wheel puller. Again, put up by OEM Tools. Part number is 37182. And what we're using is the center forcing screw, the little cup, so it has a nice flat base to it, and of course the two J hooks on the side that hook into those square holes we looked at earlier. So now it's just a matter of putting a little bit of pressure on here. Back of the steering wheel off. Again, we just want to be mindful of our airbag wiring so we don't damage it. So let me work on getting this steering wheel backed off out of here, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. You'll have to forgive my neighbors, they're cutting their grass, but you ever had one of those jobs you're like, oh yeah, we'll just get in there and we'll just, you know, pull the old steering wheel out and add our controls and put the steering wheel back in? Well, that's all it was according to plan until the metal and steering wheel broke. And where it broke was the area that these little J hooks need to grab onto to pull the steering wheel out. So what we're doing now is that we just threaded some bolts and we were able to get the steering wheel out far enough to at least get some nuts in behind it. So we just got some bolts with some nuts behind it threaded through rather than these rods, and we're going to see if we can get this steering wheel the rest of the way off. Unfortunately, this steering wheel is not going to be able to go back on, although you could put it back on, but I wouldn't trust it to be able to get it back off again. So I think what we're going to do is, like I said, I really like this steering wheel, but I don't want to buy another one of these if, you know, that metal is going to break that easily. I think what we're going to do is we're going to take the steering wheel that came off of our 2500, because remember, we upgraded the steering wheel to one of these, so hopefully on that 2500 we don't have to take that steering wheel off too soon, otherwise we know what we're in for. At least we got a heads up. So I think what we're going to do is that we're going to take the steering wheel off that one, since it was a nice leather wrapped steering wheel. Yeah, we're going to lose kind of our carbon fiber look and our kind of a race grip feel, which is the reason why I really like this steering wheel. And I think what we're going to do is just put the steering wheel on it from the 2500, which has got the same footprint. And as you can see here, it's still a really good steering wheel. Nice leather wrapped steering wheel. I mean, it'll get the job done. I'm disappointed in this one breaking, but like I said, I don't trust putting this one back in there. So I'm going to continue to work on, hopefully get this pulled the rest of the way out of here, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. Well, you ever had one of those jobs that just turned to crap? Well, we got the steering wheel off. However, you can see what the problem is. It left the inside collar behind. So either this collar has gotten seized onto the steering shaft, or this was just a poor crimp or meld with the base of the steering wheel that you see over there. Either way, the collar's here, and then we either have to what I'm thinking right now is taking the clock spring out, taking the selector switch out for the turn signals and such, and then that should give us access into this collar. We may be able to get in here with a Dremel and just kind of slice through it enough on the side to get the pressure release and maybe to get that off, and then we can find out whether the steering shaft itself in and of itself is somehow damaged, and maybe that's how this steering wheel collar got stuck on there in the first place. Like I said, when it installed in our install video, it installed fine. It wasn't fighting or anything to press in place, but obviously trying to get the steering wheel out, this part separated, this inner collar separated from the sleeve on the steering wheel that you see there. That's why the puller initially pulled through its normal mounts, and of course when we put the nuts behind it to help hold on to it, it just kind of finished pulling it the rest of the way off. So I mean that steering wheel is permanently damaged at this point. It's not going to be able to be reused, but we kind of knew that already. And if we can't get this collar off of here, then we're going to have to replace the entire steering column, which you can get, but that'll be fun to do. It's not too terrible. Yeah, it looks like we can possibly disconnect it right there at the firewall and pull it through. I'll have to take a look at it if it gets to that point. But like I said, I think what we'll do first is we'll get this lower trim dropped out of here. We'll get the clock spring off of here, as well as the turn signal multifunction switch here, and then we'll come in here with a Dremel at first and kind of slice this collar and see if we can at least get this piece off. If we can, and it's still in decent shape underneath, then obviously we can reuse the steering column and we don't have to replace it. But either way, I'm gonna take a look at this, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. Well, you can see that we got our clock spring slash turn signal assembly disconnected here. And to show you, what we have here is 1, 2, 3 connectors here at the bottom. You've got a 4th connector right there on top in the back, and you've got 1 screw right here. So if this is the top, you've got 1 screw right here in the back holding it up, and then 1 screw right there on the bottom. There we go, holding it on. So screw on bottom, screw on top, two wiring harnesses, 2 wiring harness connectors on the top, and I'm sorry, 4 on the bottom. And I'll show you where all those plug in when we go to plug this back in. Now, regardless of, but now you can see that we got a nice clear shot of what happened here. So that's the inside collar of the replacement steering wheel, and you can see it's still on the steering shaft. And so much so that when that puller went to pull on it, this either isn't stamped in well enough to be able to handle that torque, which is my feeling, or my hope anyway, because then that would mean if we just come in here with a Dremel and maybe put a couple of slits in this. I don't have a puller that would be able to get on such a shallow lip and try to hold that and be able to allow us to pull that off. I'll try to put a 3-jaw puller on it, but I don't think the 3-jaw puller I have is going to go small enough and narrow enough. If not, then like I said, we'll just get a Dremel in here and just cut some slits in this, and that should help us. That should take the tension off of this collar and allow us to pull this out. As for this, when that steering wheel kind of broke and those arms pulled through, it sent kind of metal shrapnel glitter all over this. So I think what I'm going to do is, regardless of whether we have to replace the steering column or not, is to just get a new clock spring and a new multi-function switch. That way we know they're free and devoid of metal and won't cause us a problem in the future. You can see some more evidence of the kind of little bits of metal and shrapnel that kind of had just happened when that steering wheel started to pull apart. And like I said, when I was pulling on it, I didn't realize that it was actually pulling away from its main mounting collar here. So I'm going to take a few more minutes just to kind of eyeball things over, see what I've got for some nice heavy-duty Dremel cutting discs. I think I have to get some new cutting discs, and then we'll come out here and zip a couple cuts into this and see if we can get this collar off. Hopefully we can, and the hope is that the splines on the steering column underneath are also in good shape. Now what I'm going to do before I start to put a Dremel in is I'm going to put a little piece of tape on the front of this so we don't get debris down in the threads, and then also you know, put some painter's tape around this area as well, just to keep any metal shards from kind of flying all over the place. Oh well, it's one of those things. You start in on the project and stuff happens, and the only thing we could do at this point is just kind of adapt and go forward and fix it. So let me ponder some stuff and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. As you can see, we just went through with some fabric tape as a precautionary measure and just taped the ends of all our connectors in order to keep debris and everything out of them while we go through this process. Matter of fact, I may even take all these and just kind of tape them up back here to keep them further out of the way. But we got some heavy duty cutting discs on our Dremel, and it's actually making short work of this. It's actually able to chew through this metal pretty good. You can see we got a nice little groove in it. So once we get far enough down and start to relieve the tension off of this grommet, we should be able to just hit it with either a hammer or a brass punch, and hopefully get it the rest of the way off of here. And like I said, if our splines are okay underneath, then we should be good to go. I'll just get a replacement clock spring and a replacement turd signal multi-function switch. Again, we could probably use the ones that were on it, but when that back of that steering wheel kind of exploded away from this bracket here, like I said, it kind of sent little glitter all into the mechanisms of that, so I don't trust to put them back on. So I'm going to continue to work on this and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. We ended up making 2 cuts across here. Not quite deep enough to make it all the way through to hit the splines, but deep enough on each side that we were then able to get a punch and just kind of hit it up this way and knock this centerpiece out. So I mean, it looks fine as far as the way that it was splined into the shaft here. It doesn't look like it bound up on anything, but it's definitely still on there. I didn't quite take enough pressure off of it. I think what we need to do is just maybe make one more slice this direction with the Dremel, maybe knock another piece off of here, and then hopefully that will relieve enough of the bite that it has on it to get this off. So I'm going to work on that, and that's the first bit. The good news is the Dremel is, you know, cutting through this stuff fairly easily. So let me make one more cut in this and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. We got a second slice out, as you can see here. Again, just notched it big enough that we could get in there with a brass punch and knock it the rest of the way out. But you can see with that gone now, we're actually able to now get in here and just kind of catch it on this corner, and we're slowly driving the remainder of this piece off. So I'm going to continue to work on getting this piece off, and I'll bring you back. Apologies, yes, I'm talking through a mask right now. I am wearing a mask because I'm doing all this because it is generating just a lot of filing dust. Yeah, gonna have a lot of cleanup in here once we're ready for reassembly, but I'll bring you right back. And welcome back. Well, there it is. What's left of it, that is the center portion of that steering wheel. And like I said, I don't see any cross-driven, you know, keyways on it. I mean, it didn't go on cross thread, you know, basically the splines were lined up is what I'm trying to say. If the splines weren't lined up and then maybe they went on kind of, you know, missed a spline or went between the splines, I could understand why it would have stuck on. But you can see there is a little bit of rust in there from just that short amount of time it was on there. There is a little bit of rust on the steering shaft. That may have been enough to hold it in place. But what I'm thinking happened is this bottom of this barrel, once the steering wheel was seated far enough, it got onto this shoulder here, which is where that barrel should rest. Right there is where the steering wheel would normally stop. I think once it got onto this piece, it was too tight of a fit on this bottom collar. This bottom area here, you see no splines. It's meant to go, again, it's meant to go that far and seat that deep in and stop right where you see this shoulder. So I think what happened is this inner diameter was just a hair too small, maybe a few thousandths too small compared to what it should have been. So it was enough that you'd been able to drive it on, but as you can see, when we tried to pull it off, this piece ended up pulling out of the center of that steering wheel. So anyway, the good news is I don't see any messed up teeth, splines, nothing's folded over. We did cut a little bit with the Dremel into this shoulder, but no biggie. I could take some 1000 grit sandpaper and just kind of go over this area and sand it up real well, polish it back out, it'll be fine. But yes, and as you can see, we did fabric tape around that so no dust got inside of the steering column. Either way, with that being said, what we can do is now source some parts. I'm going to have to order, like I said, a new clock spring and a new multifunction turn signal switch. And then once those come in, we can complete our reassembly. But with that being said, like I said, good news is it looks like the steering shaft itself is fine and we don't have to replace it, so that's awesome. But it is off, but it did take slicing out sections of it with a Dremel enough that that grip, the hold that it had, was relieved, and we could just drive it the rest of the way off. But awesome. Anyway, with that being said, let that be a lesson to you. Those aftermarket steering wheels can get you, and in this case it bit us. But I'll let you go and I'll bring you back in. Well, it'll be a moment for you, but it may be a few days for me while I get some parts in. So catch you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. Well, I got you on the bench, and while we await parts, and again, what those parts are going to end up being is a clock spring and a signal, turn signal switch, aka multifunction switch, because it does turn signals and quite a few other things within the vehicle. You can see this is the steering wheel that we removed. Now this is the one that we put on, I don't know, probably about a month or so ago at this point, and it was this nice carbon fiber race type steering wheel where it's had the flat bottom and the nice handheld grips. The steering wheel in and of itself was fine. I mean, there were no issues with it. Matter of fact, fortunately and unfortunately, we also put one of these in our 2600. And earlier, what you saw inside of the video clips was as we were putting a puller on here to pull this off, the puller actually pulled through. There are little holes here, and the reason why you see embedded nuts behind here, that's what we eventually had to do, use some old school bolts with that puller to finish getting this steering wheel off. And what was happening, and I didn't realize it, was that this center collar, which should be installed into that steering wheel, was actually, this part stayed on the steering shaft and this part pulled out of the main steering wheel. So again, it's not an expensive carbon fiber type steering wheel, so we're not out much, and I guess it's kind of one of those, you know, you get what you pay for type things, unfortunately. Now, again, fortunately and unfortunately, we put one of these in our 2500. It'll work fine. I don't perceive any issues out of it, because even though this center collar pulled out of here, you know, it still took quite a bit of force on our part to finish getting that out. So I don't think it's going to go anywhere, and it looks like it's only going to present itself to be a problem if we ever have to remove the steering wheel in our 2500. Then we kind of know what we're in for. Again, just to show you the force that it was applying to finish pulling this steering wheel off, because it couldn't, this collar again stayed stuck to the steering column, so it pulled the steering wheel off this sleeve. You can see the nuts we had behind the bolts on the puller started to embed themselves into these little channels in the back of the steering wheel. But you guess the end, you saw that in the previous clip where we just took a Dremel, took a couple of slices out of it to be able to get the rest of this sleeve off the steering column. But I figured what we would do is, rather than get another one of these, because obviously we know getting them on okay, but getting them off is going to be a different story. I have looked up getting another carbon fiber made out of a OEM steering wheel, such as this one here, and they're just, yeah, they're out of price range at this point in time. So what we're going to do, since we have this one, which is this vinyl wrapped steering wheel that came out of our 2016 2500, we're just going to take the buttons and the trim pieces and add in our new buttons, and basically rework this steering wheel and put this one in our 2012. Yeah, the downside is, you know, we're going to miss the flat spots and the nice ability to grip that you see here and up top and, you know, down below. And it does make again, in my mind, a huge difference, but I really don't want to buy another one of these knowing the problems we're going to have if we ever try to remove it. So again, we're just going to go back for this one for now, and if I can find a decently priced setup where they can rework an OEM steering wheel to kind of take on this type of shape, then we'll revisit it at that point. So what I'm going to start doing is just pulling this trim off. Now what I wanted to show you is what we were talking about earlier. Remember, we said that we bought this trim, and it says that this is for a 13 to, I think, 2021 or 2022 Ram 1500, or several Rams. Now, this was the back trim piece that we took off the factory steering wheel when we put it on this aftermarket one. Again, hence it doesn't have the cutouts for the side buttons. But, just to show you, look at the layout pattern of that one, and look at the layout pattern of this one. Watch what happens when I just kind of put them on top of each other. That back piece is identical. So even though this one says it's for a 13 on up, and this steering wheel we know came from the factory this way for a 2012, I think this is just the case where that 2012 was built late enough in the calendar year, and it ended up just getting kind of a, you know, again, a 2013 formatted steering wheel as far as its buttons and molding. Anyway, what I'm going to do is, again, start taking the Phillips screws out, the Torx screws out, and start separating our plastics and getting our horn buttons and everything out, and start prepping to put it all back in the steering wheel. So I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got this pretty much tore down. At least we've got the two clamshells removed, our upper and lower pieces, and there's our, obviously, our buttons on our front piece of trim. Now, since we also have a bit of downtime now while we're waiting the clock spring and such to come in, I went ahead and ordered the replacement bank of switches for this side. And what it's going to do is add the two U-connect buttons here at the top. So we'll have the ability to do click here to get the microphone to pick up, and then click here to get it to hopefully launch the phone app on the head unit. Like I said, it may do it or it may not do it. We're going to have to try, but you know, since we had it apart and we were going to be in here, now is a perfect time to get this bank of switches over here replaced with the, again, the one that'll give us the two additional buttons at the top. Now, this wiring harness is the old harness. And basically, really the main difference between this harness that's in here now, it's still hooked up to the horn buttons, and the harness that we're going to go over to, is that this harness has the connections in it to account for the two additional buttons that we're going to put on within these holders here on the sides of the steering wheel. So I'm going to continue to pop out these horn buttons out of this steering wheel, get this harness disconnected again, because this will be our old one, but we'll hold on to this one because there's nothing wrong with this harness. And then we'll get our buttons transferred over to our new steering wheel and go from there. So one moment. And welcome back. So just getting ready to put our switches into our new rear molding. According to Mopar, the switch with part number 98AD, in our case it ends in 98AD, this is the right hand side switch, and the 99AD is the left hand side switch. And no, these are not Mopar parts, neither is the wiring harness. They were pretty much unobtainium through the manufacturer, so we're going with aftermarkets. And we'll see if they work. If not, then we'll have to pop them out and replace them. The nice thing is you can actually pop these out and replace these through the back here without actually having to disassemble the steering wheel to do it. Or at least on the last one I did this on, we were able to do that. We were able to kind of get the old one out and get the new one in. Now, you don't have much length to work with here on the wiring harness, but it can be done. So what I'm going to do is get the switches into our trim piece, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So just giving you a little live action here. We're going to put our right hand side switch in. And at least with these aftermarkets, I'm finding out they kind of favor one way versus the other. On this one, it seems to be happier with having the pigtail facing down. I may turn that right hand one over on the other end as well. But usually you can just kind of take them, get them started, get one end of them in, and just finish popping them the rest of the way in. Now, if you look at this switch on the inside here, you can see this end is a little bit lower than the other one. So we just give that a little bit more of a push, and there we go. Okay, so yeah, beautiful. Okay, so we're now seated, we're engaged. And I'm going to take this red one out and see if I can at least flip it to where the wire pigtail is going down inside the collar versus up. So once again, just take them, flip them out, get them seated. And is that one in all the way? Yeah. Okay, so beautiful. So those are in, they're locked, wiring's pointed down to meet the harness on both sides. So let's start getting this thing reassembled, or at least to the point of being able to wire in our wire harness. So bring it right back, one moment. And welcome back. Well, as I promised, a moment for you, next day for me. Show you a part number here. Hopefully that comes through okay. It's 5604697AD, and this is the alternate configuration. I believe this covers the 09 to 012 as far as the range of what we were talking about earlier on the left hand side here. That's the original. Now this controls the navigation of the EVIC display in the cluster. And as you can see, the difference between the two is that the one, and this would be used like if you had a factory or you installed Uconnect. Normally they'd replace this switch bank here, and you can see what it gives you is just the ability to hit this one, which would bring up the telephone function, and this one would bring up the voice recognition function. So while we're here, we're going to go ahead and add this one in, get this changed out, and then it gives us two more buttons, provided this works okay. It gives us two more buttons that we can map these to something else within the Android head unit. So it's just 3 screws, you can see there in the back. And let me get this installed into this piece of trim, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got our new EVIC set of switches installed there on the left hand side. That is a Torx fastener, by the way, on the backs of both of these switch banks and this piece of trim. And in case you're curious, that is a T8 Torx by the looks of it. Yep. Okay, so what we need to do next is we've got our connection there, which is our right hand bank of switches. This one's connection for our left hand bank of switches here, and of course this one goes into our clock spring. So what I'm going to work on is getting those connections made to the back of these switches and getting this front piece of trim down in place. So let me work on that and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. You can see we got our trim back in, got our wiring complete at this point, all our fasteners back in. Remember, we got the Torx fasteners on top, Phillips on the bottom. Back of the steering wheel is the same way. You got 2 Torx on top and 2 Phillips on the bottom. We got our 2 clamshells snapped back in place. It will, the upper and lower will snap in along the edges in a few spots. So we got all that taken care of, and as you can see, we're reassembled. So we've got the trim front trim piece and option buttons from a 2012. The rear clamshell is listed as belonging to a 2013, and the steering wheel is off a 2016 2500. But it just goes to show you how interchangeable all the 4th gen Ram parts really are. Now, I did a bit more research on the steering wheel, and this steering wheel configuration, which I thought was probably, seems to be only the 2013 on-ups, apparently this is the configuration for a 2012. A lot of the posts I saw, individuals are saying that Ram or Chrysler, Stellantis, you know, whatever they call themselves now, did this change back in 2012. So the 9 to 11s are the ones that have the kind of 2 thin buttons on this side and 2 thin buttons on this side, and the cruise control was an extra lever down here at the bottom. And apparently the feedback they got was a lot of individuals didn't like the cruise control lever sticking off kind of like the bottom corner of the steering wheel over here. So in the 2012s on up, that's when they moved it to the steering wheel, and we have the button configuration that we do here. So with that being said, I've rambled on long enough. Now that we've got this assembled, it'll be, again, just a few moments for you, but it'll be a few more days for me until we get our new clock spring and our new multi-function turn signal switch in, and then we can get this steering wheel reinstalled in our 2012 and see how well our volume control buttons on the side, as well as our 2 buttons here. Now remember, when we go to plug this in, this may work right out of the box or it may not. We may have to pull up the Alpha OBD and enable the additional volume control buttons that are now, again, on the sides of the steering wheel that you can see there. Anyway, again, moments for you, a few days for me. Bring you back in a moment. And welcome back. Well, as promised, a few moments for you, but a few days for me. And if you can remember, this was our old clock spring assembly and turn signal / multifunction switch. It's all clipped together, at least on this model, as one piece. And our replacement parts have arrived. And I did go with aftermarket on these because they were available. And you can see for the turn signal / multifunction switch, it's a standard product. You see the part number there. And if we look, it is a match with what we need to replace it with. Perfect. And interesting enough, for the clock spring, I did go with standard as well. I'll show you that part number now. But what came in the box, and sometimes this happens even with aftermarket, is that you'll notice it's an actual Mopar part that the aftermarket is selling as an aftermarket. Like I said, so nice little bonus there. Now you'll notice on this clock spring, and this is pretty normal, you've got a little lock pin here. And you can see little arrows that are facing each other as it's locked in. And what this is that this pin does not get removed until after we have it all mounted up to the steering column and all of our electrical wiring plugged in. And it's an important note to remember that if you're going to be reusing this clock spring, which is right, no, we knew we were going to replace it, but the reason why is that if you are, then you kind of have to do the same thing on the original before you take it out. Get everything lined up, and then find a way to lock this rotating piece here with the back piece here. And what you're doing is you're keeping everything in line for the steering angle sensor, because if it gets out of whack with each other, then it's going to lead to either a fault on the dash or a trouble code letting you know the steering angle sensor isn't reading the correct position of the steering wheel. That's why the new ones, when you get them in, and or remanufactured ones, will be set. They'll lock those together, and the last thing we'll do, once this is on the steering column, so you can't move one outside the other, then we'll take that locking pin out. Now, with this being a factory one, the nice thing is we get new mounting hardware, upper and lower. And if you remember, the reason why we were doing this is kind of more of a preemptive measure. Remember when we pulled that aftermarket steering wheel off to begin this job, remember it pulled apart, and what it did was sent a bunch of metal fragments all over this clock spring. Some even got down inside the various grooves here, and although we could probably clean that out and take our chances with it, I didn't want to reassemble it just to have an electrical problem later and have to tear everything back apart again. So we're taking the preemptive measure, replacing the clock spring, as well as the little side turn signal / multifunction switch. And there are some pieces we're going to have to take off of this unit here, such as this blank switch cover, because we don't have a powered steering wheel. So we'll migrate that over to the new one. So what I'm going to do is work on these two pieces here and get our new unit assembled and ready to go into place. So give me a few minutes and I'll bring you right back. One moment. Oh, I'm sorry. And the other thing that we're going to do, remember before we did any Dremel cutting, we had everything taped off. We since come in here and vacuumed all of this out, took our tape off, and then what we're also going to do, and you'll see it down here on the floor, is that we've got some contact cleaner. So we're going to go through and just kind of spray all these connectors down with some contact cleaner, just to make sure that we don't have any residual residue or anything still inside them from that cutting disc. Now, we had them pretty well covered, so I think we're fine, but we're just going to take a little extra measures here. So I'm going to take care of this and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So I figured I'd show you this, at least how this one assembles. So we got our blank switch cover moved over from our old clock spring. And this multi-function switch here, this lever, is just going to kind of drop down like this with the connector facing back. You'll see some grooves in here at the top and a groove here on the side of the clock spring that all these pieces should fall into. Matter of fact, let me just pick this up and give you a top side view of this. So you can see those grooves here, and you can see that tongue there. And we'll line up with that groove there on the side of the clock spring. There we go. Get everything lined up. And we should just be able to push it in place. A nice solid click. So that is our assembly. It looks like we're going to need to take the mounting screw off the top. Let's see if our old unit has one. Okay, and it doesn't. Okay, so there's nothing to move over there. That'll more than likely be a mounting point for something else that we need to either replace or it just isn't used at all. So awesome. What we can do now is pull our airbag wiring out, get that out of the way. And you'll see inside of that clock spring, you'll see that one, it has a flat spot. Everything's round except for the very top. And that flat spot will match up with this flat spot on the top of the steering column. And then we'll be able to slide it in place and re-secure our top and bottom screws. So let me flush these connectors out with some contact cleaner. I'm going to get this mounted and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got a clock spring reinstalled at this point, and then of course our multi-functions turn signal switch installed as well. I went ahead and remade all of our electrical connections. Now, a lot of the electrical connections on the back of this clock spring, the ones I showed, a lot of them aren't being used. They're just being clipped in the holders, like this one right here. It's just for options that we don't have. Like this one's unused on top, and there were two, I believe, on the bottom of those connectors that were also just kind of clipped into little holders. But either way, all the electrical connections are made, all the ones that are back in holders that need to be on holders. And yes, I did take a little bit of Lucas Red and Tacky grease and just kind of put it on the mating surface of the splines, as well as this flat area here where that collar kind of rests on the steering wheel. Again, just as a preventative measure to keep that center collar from seizing onto that steering wheel or steering shaft again. Book doesn't say to do this. I don't think it'll hurt it in doing this, but it should help us with the reinstall. And again, like I said, provided we have to pull this steering wheel off again, hopefully help us with it not doing what it did again. So now that we have this on here, what we can do, and just to show you that, you know, the flat part, like I was talking about earlier, the flat part of, you can see the inside of this clock spring is top and matches up. Now, it won't slide all the way in to where this flat ring here matches the top of that, but again, I just wanted to clarify that in case you thought it was going to go all the way in. It doesn't. It's set it more as a kind of an indicator, that flat spot here, flat spot here, that just let you know a good way to orient it. So this will slide on and it will seat once it gets far enough in to get your top screw back in and your bottom screw back in. So what I'm going to do now is pull the pin on this, and then I'm going to go get the steering, go get the steering wheel first, pull the pin on this, get the steering wheel, get our airbag lines through, get our steering wheel lined up with our master spline and our steering shaft here, and then work on getting this thing pressed in place. And I know I showed this in a previous clip, but just to show you that part number again, we are going to go back in this time with a brand new steering wheel bolt, and you can see it does have some kind of I'm assuming that's some kind of Loctite, white colored Loctite. Either way, let me go take care of that and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got our steering wheel in, we got our bolt secured, we got our wiring connected up into a clock spring. Now we just have our airbag wiring out here for us to deal with. And I will tell you that the OEM steering wheel went into those splines a lot easier than that aftermarket did. It literally just kind of fell in place. Now the aftermarket one did seat and it did drive on, but I think that was part of the problem. So kind of going back to our theory of the way they had that center lug splined wasn't quite correct. So what I've been looking at, what I think we need to do is that when we go to revisit this in the future and put the nice Gromic steering wheel back in here, we're going to go with one of the companies out there that takes an OEM core such as this one and reworks it. That way we, you know, avoid any fitment issues in the future. So we got everything connected, and what I'm going to do next is, like I said, just finish getting the I think we'll try it and make sure our multifunction buttons and everything work before we put our airbag in. That way, if we have to revisit this, it's maybe much easier. So let me do that. Let me get that battery reconnected and at least verify that we've got basic functionality out of these buttons. That way we know these will be okay. These we can kind of pop out and gain access to and replace from outside the steering wheel without having to take everything apart. So let me do that and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we did just a quick bit of testing here. Navigation buttons work for the EVIC display. Cruise control buttons work. I did try these briefly and the radio doesn't see them, but we kind of expected that to happen. We're going to have to turn that option on in the truck and then give that another go. So what I'm going to do is we get the battery re-disconnected at this point. We're just going to let things continue to bleed down, but I'm going to go ahead and put the upper and lower clamshells back on. You've seen me do that before. It's just the bottom one is 3 bolts. It's the 2 bolts on the corner that hold the lower and the upper half together, and the bottom also has the one in the center. I'll show that to you here So you've got the one in the center there, and you've got the two on the sides that hold the two halves together. But meanwhile, that'll give enough time for the residual juice in the vehicle to drain down once we get this clamshell back in, and I'll go ahead and reattach the airbag. So when I bring you back, I'm going to bring the laptop out here with Alpha OBD, and we're going to hunt down what we need to turn on for these steering wheel controls, or at least verify that they are turned on, and then that way we know we've got something within the head unit to take a look at. With that being said, I'll bring you back in a moment. And welcome back. Well, it's been a few days as we waited out the rain, and originally I was going to bring you back and, as I stated, put you on a laptop, bring up Alpha OBD, and see if we could get these buttons that we installed on our steering wheel here programmed into the vehicle. And we ran into a problem on the laptop in which it would attempt to make the change and just kind of sit there, and eventually Alpha OBD would come up and say, okay, the command was successful, but we didn't really get the response back we were kind of expecting. Basically, check and see if the setting took. And I checked and it didn't take, so no matter what we do, it won't change that parameter for the remote steering wheel switches to set. So we're going to try something a little different. We've got Alpha OBD loaded up on our phone this time, our Android phone. And we went out and purchased the suggested Bluetooth dongle, which is what you see here, the OBDLink MX Plus. So what I'm going to do is plug this in the OBD port, OBD2 port, I should say. I'm going to get this paired to the phone, and I'm going to attempt to screen record the phone and include that in the video. But we're going to try this version of Alpha OBD and see if it will A, make the change, or B, have the same fault. Hopefully it won't have the same fault and it'll actually make this change, but we shall see. So let me get this, show you what the dongle looks like. It comes in a nice box, comes in a very nice carrying case. And again, this is just a Bluetooth version of the one per Alpha OBD's website that they suggested that we use. And there's our pairing button, Bluetooth pairing button on the lower left. So I'm going to get this plugged in, pair it up to the phone, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got a Bluetooth dongle paired to our phone. We've got the ignition on, but not in the run position. So what I'm going to, and I am screen recording on the Android phone. Hopefully this turns out okay, and I'll add it into the video. But hopefully you can see that in case it doesn't. But I'm going to go into the Bluetooth symbol here. We're going to allow Alpha OBD to find some items. There we go. OBDLink MX Plus is what we're looking for. You want to check it as a default Bluetooth interface, and I'll tell you what we're going to do is just going to cancel on that one. I'm not looking to set any defaults right now. So Dodge Ram 1500. Let's just go ahead and reselect our options here. Dodge Ram, body computer. Now remember, we're on a 2012, so we're going to go 2006 to 2012. And then we're going to say connect. Okay, so connected to central gateway module. Perfect. And what I want to do first is down here, little picture of a vehicle with its hood up. It's kind of hard to see the little icon. But what I want to try first is, and it should be at the bottom here before we go into changing any config, just to be on the safe side. Oh, I wish this list was in alphabetical order. Backup vehicle config to file. And we're going to start that. Okay, completed successfully. So we got a backup config of what's in there before we make any changes. Now we're going to grab our pull down again, and we're going to say car configuration change, just like we did on the laptop. We're going to look for vehicle config 2, remote steering wheel switches, and we're going to say we want to change those to set. We're going to start that. Currently is not set. Hopefully this will go to set. Oh, procedure completed. So that's better than what we got before. So now what we're going to do, now that that's done, we're going to come back to our key icon. I'm going to disconnect from our central gateway. Go ahead and shut off the ignition. And remove our dongle. I always like to disconnect when I'm done making changes, and it's also suggested per Alpha OBD to make one change, turn off the ignition, let it set for about 30 seconds before you try to make another one. Now I have seen where others have, let me stop the recording on the phone one moment. Let's see here. We want to stop the recording. Okay, screen recording saved. Okay, perfect. So hopefully we can get that, we'll get that off the phone later and get that included in the video so you can better see what we were selecting there. So now that we've, again, I've seen individuals do more than one change at a time and they say they've been fine, but again, just kind of my paranoia. So let me do this. Let me stop you, get you zoomed out, and then I'll bring you back and we'll see if we now have volume control on our radio. So one moment. And welcome back. Well, been a short bit for you, but been a few days for me, and I'll explain why. We went to test our volume controls, and no, I didn't put this on the video after discovering that we were going to have to get a different set of buttons. Now they do work, so using the Alpha OBD software to enable the feature in the truck, it did see, and you can see, yes, we do have this disassembled here for a little bit because we had to take the old buttons out, but enabling it did allow it to work. It did allow the Android head unit to see it. The problem is the buttons were very erratic, like maybe once out of every 10 button presses it would respond to volume. The switch over here, which was this one, was a little bit more consistent. It would work maybe once out of every 5 or so presses. But this one, when it did work, it would more or less stick. Meaning the radio would just, you would see it register that you hit volume up, and it would just keep going until you finally hit a button on the radio to get it to stop, or, you know, kept hitting the button on the steering wheel control to get it to stop. So what I started looking into, since these were the aftermarket ones, was, and this is from All Data, and this is what they say the resistance values for these switches should be, based on if it's the one that controls volume, which in this case the aftermarket one is this one. This is the one that controls seek up, seek down, and station pre-select advance. So I checked the resistance measurements on this one with a meter, compared it to the chart, and this one is way off, and I mean way off in specifications. Then I went back and looked at the seller reviews for these, and they were kind of saying the same thing, where one individual even stated, like I've seen, where these worked maybe a third of the time. So I went and looked up the part numbers and ordered in an actual set of Mopar volume or remote steering wheel switches, as they're called. I'll show you each of these part numbers. So there's your first part number there, and you'll notice that the Mopar ones are color coordinated. Now it uses the same color wire, but you'll notice this switch has a white backing, this switch has a black backing. So I'll show you the 5669, and if we look at our chart here, you'll notice it says right is white, left is black, meaning this is the switch for the right hand side steering wheel. And this part number here, the 6099AD with the black background or black backing, is left. So this button here does your seek up, seek down, and your preset station advance this button here does volume up, volume down, and mode advance. Now for giggles, I did take these aftermarket ones and swap them around inside the steering wheel, and it didn't make any difference as far as their functionality. Now what I did find interesting though, it still saw this one as volume, because remember, it's going by, these are resistor bridges, and it's going by these resistive values when you go up, down, or center button, and then that bus then translates it onto the LIN bus, you know, what button it is and which function you're selecting. So if you wanted to, it looks like if you wanted your volume over here, you could actually just switch these radio buttons around, and they seem to work just fine regardless. But what we're going to do is get these buttons, these factory buttons, installed and see if we get better performance. We should get some better performance, because again, with the resistance values on this one, they weren't even close to what they needed to be per this chart. And if you've worked on Chrysler electronics before, one thing it gets very, very touchy about when it comes to its sensors and other buttons are its resistive values. So what we're going to do is get these installed, and I'll bring you back. So one moment. And welcome back. So we just have it installed enough to at least do some button testing here. And already I can tell you, much better improvement using the actual OEM switches than those aftermarkets. For example, real quick, just so we don't hit copyright, but you can see there on the radio, see, I can raise and lower volume on that just fine. The other set of switches, you can see, changes the preset, scrolls through the presets on the radios. If I hit the center button on this one, it'll scroll through the various applications on the radio. And this one just brings up the phone, as you can see there. Let me go back to the launcher here and back into the radio. Okay, so awesome. So yeah, that definitely took care of the really intermittent sketchiness and the buttons not working correctly. Like I said, Chrysler gets really particular when it comes to their resistance readings, especially in their switches and sensors. So in the description below, I'm not going to put a link to these. These were the aftermarket ones that were basically, no good. But I will put a link to the aftermarket wiring harness that I showed you earlier, because that wiring harness, again, seems to be working without an issue. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is disconnect the battery, get this all powered down, disconnect the battery, get the airbag and stuff back in here, and I'll bring you back. So one moment. And welcome back. As you can see, we're all back together. We just got the key and the ignition. It's on, but not in the run position. But just want to show you again, if we reach over here now and hit one of our steering wheel controls. Yeah. Just trying to avoid copyright. Sorry for the, you can see, hopefully you can see that flash up there. You can hear the volume raise and lower. The other button on the steering wheel, you can see advances and goes through the presets, at least on the radio. So awesome. So at this point, we have a functioning system. Although we, unfortunately, the aftermarket steering wheel that we had on here with the nice kind of race grips and everything on it, kind of pulled itself apart, as you saw when it was pulling off the steering column. So we had to go back to this steering wheel, which we took off of our 2016 2500 over there, because we put the same type of aftermarket steering wheel on it. So hopefully, knock on wood, that 2500 steering wheel doesn't have to come off anytime too soon. Otherwise, if we have to pull that one off anytime too soon, we know what kind of battle we're in for. More than likely, it's probably going to pull itself apart just like it did on this one. Hopefully it doesn't. Anyway, I digress. So to recap, what we ended up doing was ordering a new rear piece to account for our buttons, a wiring harness that hooked up to everything here, the existing buttons as well as the new ones. We changed out the EVEC navigation buttons here on this side because it gave us the 2 extra buttons, which the radio does pick up on. In other words, if I hit the telephone button on the radio now, you can see it goes to the telephone app. within here, and if I were to hit the VR button, which would normally be used for voice recognition for Uconnect, it'll actually come up on the radio, and I'll show you that here, and launch the Google listener. So awesome. So we gained 2 extra functionality by changing out the EVIC. Again, the third-party wiring harness is working fine, but ultimately we found that using these, once again, aftermarket steering wheel switches were just no good. Again, I'm not going to post a link to these in the description, but I will post a link to the aftermarket wiring harness. That one seems fine. So again, the aftermarket steering wheel exploded, pulled itself apart. We had to cut that sleeve off, as you remember. Go down to this replacement OEM steering wheel here, changed out the EVIC switches, changed out this back piece of molding on our steering wheel, so that way it would have the cutouts for our switches, which again we had to go back to using aftermarket radio switches to get this to work correctly. Now when we tried to enable the feature, which was under vehicle config 2 for the body computer, or in this vintage truck it's actually the TIPM, but it'll still be listed as body computer. When we tried to enable that feature using the software on the laptop, we were basically getting a timeout response. It wouldn't set the value. So as you saw, we switched over to the Android version using a phone and a Bluetooth dongle, and it was able to program that just fine. Again, under body computer, under change car configuration or change vehicle configuration, under vehicle config 2, I believe it was, there would be an option for remote steering wheel switches, and that's what turns these either on or off as far as the rest of the vehicle being able to see them. So once that was done and we got the proper set of rear switches in, OEM ones, as you can see, it works with the head unit just fine. And that was the primary goal of doing this, was be able to have the ability to especially change the volume without having to take the hands off the steering wheel, because although this head unit is nice and it does have the soft buttons that you can see here on the side for raising and lowering volume, you know, happen to kind of, it's not tactile. Now, muscle memory eventually would kind of maybe catch in here, and you have raise and lower volume here at the bottom, but you kind of have to hunt for it, and it's kind of on a small area. And one thing you don't want to do is have to, you know, take your eyes off the road for any period of time trying to hunt for features on the radio. It's much safer to do it from the steering wheel, in my opinion. So that being said, I know it was a long one. It was a bit of a journey. It took us quite a few days to get this one wrapped up. Again, just due to the issues with having to cut off the old, or what was left of the old aftermarket steering wheel, switch over to this one, and then obviously having to order in the OEM versions of these steering wheel switches. And once again, I'll give you both of those part numbers there. So the 5669 and then the 5670, and it's done. So with that being said, I'm going to wrap this one up here, and I'll definitely bring you back for the next one. If you have subscribed already, I do thank you immensely. If you have not, please consider doing so. We're still marching towards that 3,000 subscriber gap, and the more subscribers and the more views we can get on this channel, the easier it is to kind of bring these little projects forth, do the normal detailed videos to them, and get them published out there on the channel. So that being said, I will let you go, and I will bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.